After reading several accounts describing the path to the grotto taken by Bernadette and her companions, I began to wonder about the route that they took to gather the firewood at the Massabielle Grotto, where the apparition appeared. This is because the last water crossing to get to the grotto has been variously described as a stream, canal, or even the Gave de Pas River. Clearly, the youngsters did not cross the Gave, which is a large body of water flowing from the Pyrenees Mountains, being somewhat deep and wide, very cold, and containing outcroppings of granite that had fallen into that area. I was not able to find an old map of the city of Lourdes that would clearly show the existing roads, pathways, and canals that were in existence in 1858. As you can see from this map, which is from the early 1900s, the chapels had already been constructed, and the esplanade had already been established. So all of the roads and the canal that used to go through this area were all gone. There is a remnant, though, of the main canal that led to the Save Mill, and then on to the grotto, and then emptying into the Gave de Pas River. But there are houses over on this side of the river at that time, so that this map does not help us determine the route that Bernadette and her companions took. This drawing of a map of Lourdes in 1858 also is not sufficiently detailed to allow us to ascertain the path that Bernadette and her companions took to collect firewood. And although it does lack sufficient detail, it does point out some things that the previous map did not. For instance, we can see here the canal, which, if you follow it along, leads to the area of the grotto and empties back into the Gave River. We can also get the approximate location of the Mill de Save, which was owned by the Nicolau family. And we can also see the Isle of Chalet, which was owned by a prominent citizen of Lourdes, Monsieur de Lafitte, who owned a mansion or a house here, a sawmill, and he owned the surrounding forests. We can also see the point view, which is the old Roman bridge that crossed the Gave at that time. And as you can see, there's no other major bridge across the Gave to get to this particular area. We can also see the hospital, and this is the home of Bernadette at the time, the old jailhouse that they had to occupy because they had no other place to live, and they had fallen on hard times. A similar but slightly more detailed map of Lourdes is presented here from 1858. As best as I can establish the route taken by Bernadette and her companions, they left her home here at the Le Cachot, which was the floor or basement of the old town jail. It was just one room, and in that one room were two girls, two boys, and the mother and father. They had fallen on hard times, and this was a place that was basically given to them for free by a relative. So looking at this map and reading the descriptions in the books that I mentioned earlier, the girls took off from Les Cachots, remember my French, up the Rue des Fosses to the Rue des Bosses, and up to the gate. Now this gate was here because during medieval times, cities were walled off and gates were placed to prevent or restrict entry, especially in times of war. They would have then progressed through the gate down the Chemin du Forêt, which is the forest road. And due to my terrible stitching of this map, this road actually curled upwards through here and over to the bridge. It was while at the bridge that the girls encountered a lady by the name of Pig Nua, who was apparently washing her clothes in the river. Now this was February. It was very cold at that time, and that might have been a little bit unusual. However, on closer inspection, they found that she was cleaning pig entrails, preparing them to use for her supper. This lady was a distant relative of Bernadette, and she advised them when they told her that they were going for firewood, that there might be plenty of wood to be collected on the property of Monsieur de Lafitte, who owned a sawmill across the bridge. Of course, Bernadette thanked her and then said that it might appear to be stealing if they did that. And that encouraged her and her companions to go further than that sawmill onto public land, where any loose wood could be gathered without any risk of penalty. So they crossed the bridge at the Pont Vieux, old bridge left over from the Roman days, and came through here, which was a defined road and represented the easiest pathway to get to the grotto. Then, at about this point, they crossed over one, maybe two or three wooden bridges in order to get across the canal. This way, then this way, and over here, and this is where they crossed the bridge at the Savy Mill. And if you'll recall from the movie, that was the scene where that handsome young man helped Bernadette across the wooden bridge because she was afraid that she might fall into the canal. At the time, the Savy Mill was run by the Nicolau family. The girls would have continued past the sawmill and past the property of Monsieur de Lafitte. And probably at this point, any road ended. This was probably a logging road, and they would have gone cross country through the bushes and trees out to the public park area of the island. And number 4 marks the spot where Bernadette was at this point when she saw the apparition. As you recall from the movie, the two girls crossed over this body of water, this canal, to get to the grotto and gather wood and bones. Eventually, Bernadette crossed the canal also only after she had seen the apparition. Now this canal is here because water was needed to run the sawmill as well as the mill that the Nicolau family was running that ground wheat and corn. So there was a lock up here that caused the water from the Gave River to enter the canal, and another lock here. And as luck would have it, on that particular day, maintenance was being done at the sawmill as well as at the Nicolau mill, and the water in the canal was much lower and easier to cross. After the apparition and gathering of the wood, as I said before, Bernadette crossed over to the grotto area. And then the girls decided to take a shorter or easier route home. So instead of backtracking, they followed this path, which is still part of the procession path of today, back to the road and back home. So even though the descriptions are somewhat vague as to what took place on that day in terms of the route that the girls followed, I think there's enough information, and from a map like this, we can be pretty close to saying this is the route that the girls took to get to the grotto. Now, of course, today, everything has been changed. As I said before, the Subiras family had fallen on hard times and were living in an old abandoned jail. 1 room, 6 people, and they were essentially living day to day. The father, who was by trade a miller, had run the businesses in the ground and lost the mill that was inherited by the family. So every day he would go out and look for pickup work. Well, on this particular day, which was actually the morning of the day that Bernadette first saw the apparition, the father left the home at the Les Cachots and came up to this area. To try to see if the baker had any work for him, and he was turned away. Then he went to the postmaster and tried to secure work with the postmaster and could not find any work. However, the postmaster then suggested that he had heard that the hospital was looking for someone to take the infected, filthy waste and wrappings from the patients there to the dump to be burned. The postmaster then allowed Bernadette's father, Francois, to hitch up an old nag to a cart, and he proceeded in this direction through the northern gate to the hospital to pick up the filthy rags, and that's shown in the movie as well. And you can imagine rags filled with vomit and stool and pus and tuberculosis. But he needed the money to feed his family. So he left there, returned in this direction, taking this material through town and up to the Rue Basse, as the girls had followed before, out of the southern gate and across the Point View Bridge. But it said in the descriptions of his route that there was an old wagon road that followed the river. So there was probably some old wagon road and maybe a bridge at this particular lock such that he could follow the course of the river, because he too could see the sawmill from the cart as well as the Savvy mill, and he continued on to near the same spot where Bernadette saw the apparition. However, he went a little further, all the way out to the point here, dumped his load, burned it, and then with the help of a sheep herder who was nearby, shoveled the ashes into the Gave River. I think his total take for doing all that was about 25 cents. At any rate, in the movie, they show him dumping the waste. This is the grotto here. He was in this area above the grotto and dumped it down a hill, because in the scenes at the grotto, at the first apparition, you can see that smoldering waste in the background. So obviously the movie is a little different than what actually happened.